wait. Running through these lights at a NASCAR pace. Under city lights with some stunners on my face. I'm on tonight, feeling as fresh as my paint. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Riding through your city, what's up? I'm on tonight. Riding through those city lights. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Headed to a party, what's up? I'm on tonight. Vibing in those city lights. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Sitting with a hottie up front. I'm on tonight. Partying under city lights. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Bumping on a beat, yes sir. I'm on tonight. Vibing under city lights. Arm out the window, asking Hottie her name. I'll follow her right into the next to me. Enjoy the city life, just don't OD. Caught up under city lights, just like me. Headed to a party while she puffs on beats. Pull around the corner, see the party on the Ave. We party under city lights, dancing in the street. Doors open, time smoking, speakers on bleed. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Riding through your city, what's up? I'm on tonight. Riding through those city lights. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Headed to a party, what's up? I'm on tonight. Vibing in those city lights. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Sitting with a hottie up front. I'm on tonight. Partying under city lights. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Bumping on a beat, yes sir. I'm on tonight. Vibing under city lights. Dancing in the street with the car still rolling. Smelling like a skunk cause the bleed still going. Under city lights till the sky turn morning. Speakers on boom till the lights stop blowing. We body rock till the cops patrolling. Jealous of the candy and the chrome that's showing. Fresh candy paint on dubs playing boasting. I'm on tonight, leaving all my haters toasted. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Riding through your city, what's up? I'm on tonight. Riding through those city lights. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Headed to a party, what's up? I'm on tonight. Vibing in those city lights. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Sitting with a hottie up front. I'm on tonight. Partying under city lights. Fresh candy paint on dubs. Bumping on a beat, yes sir. I'm on tonight. Vibing under city lights.
Take control of your health by boosting your force field, the immune system. Aura tells you when your temperature is higher than normal. Live smarter, stronger, happier with the Aura Ring.
What's happening with you tonight, Queen? Yeah, I got my smooth jazz playing right now. There ain't nobody here but you and I. So I got my smooth playing right there. They are, but that's subject to change in the next click of this button. How you doing today? Did you work hard today? What's going on, realist? Good to see you here, man. Um, I keep looking for you, man. By the time I start the show, you've been already vamped out already, man. So I think I better get on to the education part faster today. What do you think? Think I should start the show now, and then anybody come in after now, they can catch up in the replay. Okay, I guess by y'all's silence that I should go ahead and get started, huh? Will that help y'all to hear me? I be acting so silly back here in this command module all by myself that it is just so crazy. For me, some of the things I be sitting back here talking about to myself. But how y'all doing today, everybody? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Oh, okay, go ahead, multitask, because I'll be multitasking too. That's great. Now, yesterday, we got started with the King of Spain, that Holy Roman, I'd be wanting to say Holy Roman Catholic Church, but it's just the Holy Romans Empire that has gone on a spree of killing off Morisco Moors and Sephardic Jews for their money. Okay, let's get that straight. He figures that if you don't convert to Christianity and give all your money to the church, then you need to be dead or run out of here. Because if you run away, you will have to leave all your riches behind, and he's going to take it. If he has to kill you, he's going to take it. So either way, he's going to take all your riches. And these people that he's talking about. Now let me tell y'all something I've figured out here from all the readings I've done. During this crusade, like any other conqueror, he is trying to conquer all the known lands for what? Their riches, their gold, their land, their animals, their people, so he can enslave them all. So that's what's really going on here. They call it the Holy Roman Crusade. Now here also you might find some Knights Templars, because this is when they were created to do his bidding. And if you fell behind in your taxes, you look up in that big red cross on the chest, which they got from the Native Americans. I've learned they would take your land and just depose you. So a lot of Sephardic Jews and Morisco Moors that were not poor people took all of their riches with them and got away. First they went to France, and then France came around with the Protestants, and the Protestants and the Moors and the Jews kind of had some flashbacks. So now we got these crypto Christians going off into Great Britain, Scotland, and Ireland. Well, guess what happens when they get to England? They become these crypto Christians, pretending to be Christians, but they're still Moors and Jews. They get on these ships intended to be indigent servants. That was part of it. The other part was they were pretending to be Christians and come into the New World to settle in Christian communities, so-called, right? Okay. Well, they actually got over here and became slave owners. Yeah, they started enslaving indigenous people and taking their lands from them and filing documents in fake courts, that started all that migration of the Native American being run off his own land. Now, to me, what I came up with thinking about that is that, you got your braces put on today? You trying to get you some new teeth with that big old smile you be doing? Hey, let's try and stick to the subject, y'all, because, when I look over here and I start reading the chat, I forget what I'm talking about. Okay, so y'all know who I am. I'm always reading this chat, but I'm also trying to help us to understand that I'm sure, there was no way that a crypto Christian, Sephardi Jew, Morisco Moor could consider themselves a Native American. But they look just like the Native American. We all looked alike. The King of Spain looked like us. The King of France looked like. We all looked alike, in those days. But when those Morisco Moors got over here, some of them mingled and mixed with the Native Americans because some of them ancestrally had been kidnapped and taken to Europe and then managed to get away and get back home, get back to their people. Some of them, did started setting up their own businesses. Once they got over it, that's what created the first Revolutionary War, is that all of those Sephardic Jews, those crypto Christians, and those Morisco Moors got over here and thought, why should we be paying England any taxes for no representation to us? And so that's what created that Boston Tea Party and everything. But what I'm learning that maybe, let me look up something right here, right now, while let me see if I can. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look up this word race, because once before, definition. I read this. It says race, a competition between runners. Okay, yeah. A strong or rapid current flowing through a narrow channel. Yeah. Compete with one another. Okay, so more. So, okay, race, the human categorization classification system used to categorize humans on basis of hereditary physical traits. That sounds like the one we don't want. Race is a categorization of humans based on shared physical or social qualities into groups. Here, this is a better one. Let me share this with y'all. If I can make this come up correctly. Let's see if we can see this. Let me share this with y'all. Look over here where it says race, human categorization classifications system used to categorize humans on the basis of hereditary and physical traits. Race is a categorization of humans based on shared physical or social qualities into groups, generally viewed as distinct within a given society. You see where I'm going with this word now? The term came into common usage during the 16th century. So it ain't a recently thought of word to use. But back in the 16th century, when it was used to refer to groups of various kinds, including those characterized by close kinship relations. By the 17th century, the term began to refer to physical phenotypical traits. But in the 16th century, it meant if you were a Sephardic Jew, you basically was a different race from, say, a Cherokee Indian, because y'all didn't share social dynamics. Does that make sense? So what I was thinking from all of that perspective, when people say, why do black people marry outside of their race? You know, now the term that I was taught about what that meant was, why do black people marry white people? Well, the thing you got to understand that color is just crayons. We're all of the same ethnic orientation. We're all human. But culturally, economically, socially, you could be considered a race of having money, and I could be considered a race of not having money. Or you could be considered a race of business office workers, and I could be considered a race of manual laborers. See that term? See that usage of race going there? See where I'm going with that? So when we talk about races of people, let's get away from that color thing about race. Hey, Linda, how you doing today? Let's get away from that thing about color, because crayons belong in a box. Humans belong in relationships with one another, because if you dig far enough, any white person, so-called white person, non-melanated skinned person, you can't say that person is what, Caucasian or white or something, because it is found, and I've done the research inside of here. You can find mulattoes with blonde hair, blue eyes, and pale skin right here in Native Americans. And in Europe also, you can find non-melanated Germans, Chinese, Middle Asian, Far East Asia. You can find people that don't necessarily look the color, but ancestrally that they are, because how would you know that Dwight D. Eisenhower was Swarthy descendant when his mama was, Swarthy colored, but he looks totally white. So what I'm saying to a lot of you now, let's stop thinking just because of the color of a person's skin makes them a non-descendant of swarthiness. Because now I have to be aware. I'm just leading up to the story, y'all. But the story is today, that this is part 2. Yesterday we realized that the King of Spain was swarthy. The King of France was swarthy. The Morisco Moors were swarthy. The Sephardic Jews were swarthy. Everybody was swarthy. King James VI that wrote the King James version of the Bible, swarthy. His mama, Queen Elizabeth I, swarthy. So, the whole objective of me being here, ladies and gentlemen, is I'm trying to help get it far enough that one day enough of us understand that we've been lied to, that somebody's going to turn the page and stop lying to the generation in front of them. Every time, like me, I was ignorant enough to think that when Obama got elected president as a black man, I quote, black man, that he would have went down in the basement, took the chains off of the black history of the world and exposed it. But since we don't vote for president, whoever it is that elected him, they were the ones that was going to decide what was going to be known and what was going to be unknown. So we just have to live with that. But what I'm aware of now, there are more swarthy people in movies now. Back when I was a kid, they prophesized that if they were to tell the truth, if they were to make a movie full of black people, nobody would pay to go see it. So that helped with the brainwashing. Now we read books. You could be reading something, and like y'all asked me yesterday, well, you didn't say if he was black or not. I don't think we'll have that problem today, right? Everybody we're seeing, everybody's being read about, every all of them, they're all swarthy colored people. Let's just remember that. That's all. That's all we got. I haven't found the book yet where our non-melanated swarthy people became in charge of everything yet. I'm still looking for that one. Okay, so that's enough of the preface. So let's go ahead and get it back into this because I'm itching to want to be back in this story, y'all. So here we go.
Judaism had mutual enemy in Catholicism because of the Inquisition's attack on both. The rise of Protestantism in Western Europe added to the insecurity of Catholicism and was one factor leading to the Inquisition. In Spain, Huguenots also were persecuted. The Huguenots were persecuted in Spain. In 1565, for example, in Pamplona, the capital of Spanish Navarre, there was an intensive roundup of active French Huguenots. While Pamplona was a major center of repression of Protestants, other areas also were similar. In Toledo, for example, in 1565, a tribunal made short work of a group of accused individuals, some who were Protestants. Second, Protestantism, like Judaism, had a special appeal to merchants and to the financially well-off and well-educated segments of society, because the Protestants were also controlling that. All right, again, this is a network, a global network. They've had it for ages. Again, they basically, he's getting onto something, but these families, like he's finding out, had a connection from way back. They're merchants. Third, and related to the second point, Protestantism had a special appeal in seaports and shipping areas of France, especially in La Rochelle area of western France on the Bay of the Biscay, about 200 miles from the Spanish border and about 80 miles from Bordeaux. Remember that the Sephardic Jews were being attracted to Holland because of their ports and the way they can go shipping. Well, they did the same. They went to these areas of France. The Sephardic and Huguenot areas of settlement overlapped to a noticeable extent. They were in the same area. Fourth, at its height, before their most severe persecutions, and the Louis XIV Huguenots comprised 1/10 of France's population. The largest numbers were in western and southern France, the areas closest to Spain. As pressures periodically increased against the new Christians in France, the new Christians, remember who the new Christians were, right? Those were the Sephardic Jews and the Moors, the Muslims. And remember, Protestantism is a type of Christianity, so they can be considered, they can go into Protestantism if they're considered new Christians in France. It is difficult to believe that some did not overtly convert to Christianity. And if they did, it is reasonable that some would have chosen Protestantism rather than Catholicism in the period when Protestantism was still strong. Get it? What he's saying is Huguenots also had a mixed treatment in France, sometimes being good and sometimes suffering from much persecution because they were not Catholic. Thousands were killed, sent to prison, or had their children taken away. Louis XIV ended Huguenot rights in 1685 and gave the Huguenots a short period of time to convert to Catholicism or go into exile. About 160,000 Huguenots went into exile and about 850,000 openly converted to Catholicism. Similar to crypto Jews, some overly practiced Catholicism but remained crypto Protestants. All right, Paul Revere's family is believed to have been a crypto Protestant. Paul Revere, we already got that. He was a Huguenot. Remember, Huguenot, who the Huguenots? There were times when it was safe to be a crypto Jew, overtly practicing Catholicism, than to be a Huguenot. But in the earlier years, up to about 1572, it was safer to be a crypto Jew, overtly practicing Protestantism, than to be an overt Jew. Throughout Huguenot history, French Protestantism had a special affinity for Jews. The Huguenots, especially in the Languedoc area of southern France, later, beginning about 1700, referred to themselves as living in the desert, which they likened to the Hebrews living in the desert. The Huguenot shield had a burning bush in the middle, with God's name written in Hebrew. In the Nazi period, French Protestants had an admirable record of defending Jewish refugees. The Jews and blacks in the early modern world. Jonathan Squarsh is the author.
Y'all enjoy my little commercial there? I didn't think so.
Early modern non-Jews in Western Europe also appeared to be confused or ambivalent about the color status of Jews. The English Sir William Barrington visited one of the Sephardic synagogues in Amsterdam in 1635 and wrote that the Jewish men were most black and insatiably given unto women. In 1643, Isaac de la Peyrère contended that once the Jews convert to Christianity, they will no longer have this dark complexion. They will change faces, and the whiteness of their complexion will have the same brightness. As an Englishman, John Greenhalgh visited the Jews' synagogue in London and wrote a friend about it in 1662, describing the chief ruler, probably the president of the Parnassim, as a very rich merchant. All right, who's the merchant? A big, black, fierce, and stern man. He was a big, black, fierce, and stern man. At the letter's end, Greenhalgh reiterated with ethnographic precision that the 100 or so Jews he saw at the synagogue are all generally black, so as they may be distinguished from Spaniards or native Greeks. All right, 100 or so, all of them in the synagogue. All right, this is in London, all right, England, the Jews, all right, black, so-called black. For the Jews' hair has a deeper tincture of more perfect raven black. In 1690, the Reverend Robert Kirk of Aberfoyle visited the same Church Alley synagogue, and in his depiction of the worship with almost identical ethnographic punctuation, he said, and this is quotes, they were all very black men and indistinct in their reasoning as gypsies, right? Just like the gypsies. Similar portrayals continued into the 18th century. Make sure if you haven't checked out my gypsy video to check that one out. Again, we're just going over this. Remember, now we know, it was Moors, so-called Moors, and Sephardic Jews who were eventually adapting and converting, becoming crypto Jews, crypto Muslims, and taking on Christianity. New Christians, becoming a lot of them Protestants, and many did become Catholics as well, but a lot of them, most of them, Protestants. All right. Century and later, William Black, Secretary of Commissioners appointed by Governor William Gooch of Virginia to deal with the Indians, described Hester Levy, a daughter of the wealthiest and best-known New York Jew, Moses Levy, whom he met in June 1744, as a very well-made, her complexion black, but very comely. She had two charming eyes and well-turned, with a beautiful head of hair, coal black. All right. As late as 1753, during the debate in England over that year's Jewish Naturalization Act, one polemicist suggested that anyone who wanted to look Jewish, all right, should rub herself with walnut husk to fix such an indelible hue and make you complete olive beauties with a lively complexion like that of the new Negro from the coast of Guinea. All right, we continue. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Thanks for tuning in. I'm trying to keep track of who's there. Same time I'm reading here. And we go into this book. We've gone into it a lot before. Just wanted to highlight a part here that relates to what we're talking about today. And it says here, the Jews also brought in much Negro strain. So the Jews brought Negro strain. Some of the noblest of the Sephardic families, aristocrats of Jewry, were Negroes. Isaac da Costa, right? The Costas, remember? Slave owners in South Carolina. Free people of color, the Da Costa family, free people of color in South Carolina. Mentioned sons and grandsons of Don Jachia Ben Jaish, who were royal treasurers, court physicians, astrologers, and royal favorites of the court of Castile and Portugal, one of whom was Don David Negro, who with another illustrious Israelite, Don Judah, All right, Don Judah, you don't play. In the following year followed Doña Leonora, widow of Don Fernando, whose favorites they had been in Castile. His name, Negro, is derived according to the author of the Chalcheth from Dos Negros, one of the three seigniories which were given to his progenitor by the king of Portugal. Race mixture was so common, all right? Race mixture was so common in Portugal that even royal family was mulatto. Says John the Fourth shows evident Negro strain, and John the Sixth was described as a dark mulatto by the French Duchess de Abrantes, who was at his court. And it's called When Scotland Was Jewish. Elizabeth. All right, so actually, before this is on minute 54. 1 second, guys. Got this other video I want to open and show you guys a little more references. Just in case. It says here it's called the Jewish Black. So right here it says the Jewish Blackness Thesis Revisited. All right, hold on, let's get the. It says abstract. The notion that in previous centuries Jews were considered to be black or seen as blacks has gained broad acceptance in scholarly discourse on the Jewish body since the early 1990s. The present article considers the notion analytically and then examines some of the evidence provided to support it. Much of this evidence does not stand critical examination. Therefore, arguably, the notion of Jewish blackness should be reconsidered. They can't debunk it. You know? 1 second. All right, so the notion of the blackness of the Jews or Jewish blackness has become commonplace in scholarly discourse. Going back to the path-breaking work of Sander L. Gilman in the late 1980s, scholars often assert that a strong European tradition dating back to the Middle Ages maintained that the Jews were black, or at least swarthy, and finds sharp expression in modern anti-Semitic literature. That in medieval literature, a theory prevailed in which the Jews were part of the black race, or were at least dark-skinned, or that the general look of the Jew was considered to be like that of the black, so-called black. This article is meant as a caveat or question mark on this prevailing notion. All right. So go to another part here. So this is the book, The Natural History of Man, comprising inquiries into the modifying influence of physical and moral agencies on the different tribes of the human family, by James Cowley's Pritchard. Okay, and let's see what he's saying. He's saying the Jews have assimilated physical character to nations among whom they have long resided. All right, so a lot of them have assimilated, meaning they have changed in appearance, in culture, and everything. Right. So let's get to the juicy part. It says right here that the Jews, they wore beards, are very conspicuous. It says the Jews of Portugal, right? Portuguese Jews. We're talking about the same people who's being expelled, right? With the Moors, says the Portuguese Jews are very dark, are very dark. Jews, as it is well known, have been spread from early times. All right, so the Jews of Portugal are very dark. Okay, because here Shakespeare and the Jews. All right, I think we already got these references. Yeah, we just got these from the churches in Holland. All right. It says here in this book, System of Geography, or a descriptive historical and philosophical view of the several quarters of the world and of the various empires, kingdoms, and republics which they contain, partially detailing those alterations which have been introduced by the recent revolutions. All right, so that's the name of the book. It's a very old book. Let me see. Volume 2. All right. 1805. All right, this is from 1805. It says, if this is true, but it says the Jews, a singular people, have been called into the assistance of the advocates for the influence of climate. They are known never to intermarry with any but those of their own sect. And notwithstanding, this is argued, we find them in different parts of the world, all colors. The English Jew is white, that's the hijack. A Portuguese Jew, swarthy. The American Jew, olive. And the Arabian Jew, copper colored. All right, so in general, melanated people, right? So again, Portuguese, swarthy. All right, and that's about it on this one. Let me go back to the video we had going. You guys remember what minute we were on? Oh no.
Do you believe the Bible? And I mean really believe it. Here in Israel, we are living in the reality of God's promise.
How are we gonna go back now? All right. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate your patience. All right, here with me. All right, I'm gonna continue now. Now we know they were Swarthy, right? Any questions? So Moors and Sephardic Jews are people with melanated complexions. Isaac the Coast. All right. All right, John. Okay. And it's called When Scotland Was Jewish. Elizabeth Caldwell Hirschman and Donald N. Yates. Michael served as a multilingual translator in Sicily and Palermo. In 1378, a master mason, John Lowen, has hired to refurbish the walls of Roxburgh Castle. Around 1400, a Parisian master mason, John Moreau Moore, was commissioned to enlarge Melrose Abbey. All right, a Moore. All these people, the real architects, right? Of course, they're going to hire the real original architect, right? Those trait patterns, capabilities, and names were most common to two ethnic groups at the time, Spanish Moors and Sephardic Jews. They were the ones doing that. They were the contractors. Not only did Islamic mercantilism far surpass that of Western Europe and Christendom, but Jews were well represented in all branches of European business and industry, with the possible exception of agriculture and foodstuffs preparation. Jews and Muslims came to dominate such fields as banking, shipping, chemical and pharmaceutical, glass, silk and paper manufacture, the book trade, and jewelry, precious stones during this time period. Continuing the book, when Scotland was Jewish, says something about somebody's ancestry behind his family's French Huguenot roots in Charleston, South Carolina. Draws attention to the fact that the Huguenot seal of 1559 had the same four Kabbalistic Hebrew letters, right? The JHVH, the tetragrammaton, engraved upon it, within a burning bush, no less, as we found in basalt on the title page of the Edward Robin Psalter in Aberdeen in 1623. Many of the Huguenots were formerly Jews and Moors. Again, what? Many of the Huguenots were formerly Jews and Moors. And in France, the persecution of Jews and Huguenots went hand in hand. Same people. The King Dragonards came after both. They didn't just go after the Huguenots when they were getting rid of them in France. They were getting rid of their brethren, the Jews, the Sephardi's. After both with equal ferocity, and often the same legislation was used to condemn them. So see, part 5, LDS, so the Latter Day Saints, right? So they were making a whole connection with the Latter Day Saints and Sephardic Moorish people. It says that the displaced Jews, like so many tiny floating seeds from a milkweed pod, landed on the fertile ground in Holland, France, Scotland, Germany, Switzerland, and England, where they grew into the Protestant Reformation. Who? Displaced Jews or Moors. They became what? The Protestants. The Huguenots respected the Jews and Moors as children of Abraham. The Huguenots sought to protect the Jews and Moors. Why did the Huguenots protect Jews and Moors? Cecil Roth, a British Jewish historian, asserts many Huguenots were converts to Jews and Moors. That's why. Abraham Lavender, PhD, professor of sociology and anthropology, points out that the Huguenot seal of 1559 has the same four Kabbalistic Hebrew letters, the tetragrammaton, okay, engraved upon it with a burning bush. Hirschman and Yates have stated, we propose that the Reformation, beyond being a movement against Catholicism, all right, beyond what they told us in history, that it was just a movement against Catholics should also be seen as a movement towards Judaism. Basically, it was the Jews and the Moors. It was the Moorish people, you know, protesting, right? Protestants protesting the Catholics. They didn't want to be Catholics. Singing songs. So etymology online of Huguenot, just before we get started, right? Huguenot is French Puritan. So now we're gonna get into, like, you know, the whole history of the Huguenots. Now I wanted to go over all this information before this, just to understand their ethnicity, their culture, their background. Now you're gonna understand why they were getting persecuted all over Europe. Do you guys see why they were getting persecuted all over Europe? All right. Now watch this. So what happened? All these people eventually got together, and they did what? They did what when they got together? They took an oath. We're about to read that. All right. Thanks for being here. We still got a long way to go. Hope you enjoy. 1562. So this is the etymology of Huguenot. Middle French Huguenot, which according to French sources originally was a political, not a religious term. All right. Because now they want you to think it's a religious thing. The name was applied in 1520s to Genevan partisans opposed to Duke of Savoy, who joined Genève to the Swiss Confederation. And on the most likely guess, probably it is an alteration of Swiss German Eidgenoss, Confederate. All right, Confederate. All right, for everybody who knows Psalms 83, what we know about Confederate, Confederation, a Confederate. From Middle High German, Etigenos, all right, an oath, an oath. All right, it says comrade, comrades. Cognative with Old English Genede, comrade, companion. He with whom one shares possessions, thus comrade, thing of value, possession, to make use of, enjoy, a Huguenot. All right, so what's a reform? So it says in 1300 to convert into another and better form. To convert into another and better form. They were already something, right? They're converting, they're turning, they're changing into something else. From Old French reformer, rebuild, reconstruct, recreate. From Latin reformer, to form, again, change, transform, alter. From again, form to form. In traced sense for 1580s. Course of life, or well, down here it says reform, any proceeding which brings back to a better order of things. Oh, so now it's a little different, right? Any proceeding which brings back a better order of things. Let's bring order back. From reform, and in some uses from French reformement, a branch of Judaism. A branch of what? A branch of what? Judaism. As a branch of Judaism in 1843. Now, I was like, what does this mean? So, King Nosen, again, just want to make sure, Confederates. We got the etymology earlier, Confederates, right? And I actually got it in a Spanish Wikipedia, and I wanted to translate it, and it says, Eigengenossenschaft is a German word that means confederation. The term can be literally translated as an oath of camaraderie, right? And Eidgenossenschaft is a confederation of equals, which can be individuals or groups like states, formed by a covenant sealed with a solemn oath, all right? Such alliances can be limited in time or eternal, all right? They can be eternal, meaning it's still going on today, ladies and gentlemen. An important characteristic is that the parties are always considered equal, unlike the feudal society's oath of fidelity with their strict hierarchies, all right? So what are these Huguenots really? What are they letting us know here? What does this mean? What does this mean? It says here, Huguenots, a name which the French Protestants are often designated. Its etymology is uncertain, they say. According to some, the word is popular corruption of the German Eidgenossen, conspirators, confederates. All right, conspirators, confederates, which was used at Geneva to designate the champions of liberty and of union with the Swiss Confederation, as distinguished from those who were in favor of the submission of Duke of Savoy. The close connection of the Protestants with Geneva in the time of Calvin might have caused its name to be given to them a little before the year 1550 under the form Eigenot or Eignot, which became Huguenot. Huguenot. All right, you see how it be changing? All right, so under the influence of Hughes, Besançon Hughes being one of their chiefs, he was one of their Hugues or conspirators, right? Others have named after Hugo on account of Tours. All right, so they're trying to give us a whole explanation. This is from the New Advent online dictionary, the Catholic Encyclopedia. So now, real quick, just want to show this. All right, so just want to make sure we're clear. Etymology of Huguenot, a confederate people of comrades, right? What would cause what comrades? Now we know the background, right? Sephardic Jews, Moors, all these people are getting kicked out together. So what do they do when they gather in south of France? They become confederate. Confederate against who? The Catholics. Confederate against who else? We'll see. You know. But hey, what do we know about Confederate people? Psalms 83. And yeah, comrades, conspirators, we read the broke it down, right? That's the etymology of Huguenot. But we know their ethnic background, so we understand why they're coming together as comrades. Now we're going to go into some of the history of the Huguenot, what they tell in mainstream, who they are in France and what happened to them, right? Being persecuted just like the so-called Moors and Sephardic Jews. Book, The Huguenot Bartholomew Dupuy and His Descendants, all right, by Reverend B.H. Dupuy. And down here it says, they declare their pedigrees after their families by the house of their fathers, Numbers 1:18. In this book, in the introduction, says the rise and progress of the Huguenots, origin of the term Huguenot. The term Huguenot was originally a designation given about the middle of the 16th century to the Reformed or Calvinists of France. All right, we already got those definitions. You mean a return of the order, the old ways, the order, all right, taking over, a changing of something. The origin of the word is involved in great obscurity. It's very obscure. They don't want you to know what it means, but then they tell us what it means, right? Professor Mann, the distinguished philologist of Berlin, has given no less than 15 explanations of its supposed abbreviation. The three most plausible need only be mentioned. It has been derived from a faulty pronunciation of the German Eidgenossen, Confederates, Confederates who were called Ignots, a term applied to the Patriotic Party of Geneva, who maintained themselves in the connection with French Protestants against the tyrannical attempts at Charles III, Duke of Savoy. They were trying to take over his kingdom. This was a favorite explanation of the origin of the word with those writers who represented the Huguenots as secret conspirators against the crown. All right, it says Huguenot Church. French Calvinists adopted the Huguenot name around 1560, but the first Huguenot church was created 5 years earlier in a private home in Paris, it says here. The origin of the name Huguenot is unknown, but believed to have been derived from combining phrases in German and Flemish that describe their practice of home worship, like practicing in secret, right? Practicing in secret. By 1562, there were 2 million Huguenots in France. 2 million Huguenots in France with more than 2,000 churches. Where did these Huguenots come from? All right, we're going to get to all this. Now, it says here, this book, The Huguenots, their settlements, churches, and industries in England and Ireland by Samuel Smiles, LLD. Sixth edition. This is from 1889. And this image on the left is basically the massacre of St. Bartholomew. Those who have studied or if you study the Huguenot history, that was one of their infamous days where they got massacred, right? Because they had to convert or leave. They weren't tolerating Protestantism, and but they were. So that's what happened. You're gonna see that resembles somebody in history too, right? So it says the refugees thus found themselves exposed to an Anglican persecution. So they're talking about the Huguenots instead of a papal one. Rather than endured, several thousands of them left the country, abandoning their new homes, and then again risking the loss of everything in preference to giving up their views as to religion. I so remember, it wasn't so religion. About 140 families emigrated from Norwich into Holland, where the Dutch received them hospitably. All right, so they went to all the way to Holland, right? These Huguenots from France, and these Dutch people received them with no problem. We're going to see why too. Why? So the Dutch, so-called Dutch, this was New Amsterdam. Many Sephardic Jews were already there, set up shop. One of the most successful people at that time. you know, in Holland. That's why.
Why they received them with no problem and gave them house accommodation free house accommodation. Why would they just do that? With exemption from taxes for 7 years. You don't even have to pay taxes for 7 years. Huguenots.
What I meant is New Jerusalem. I don't, I said New Amsterdam. I meant New Jerusalem. They called Amsterdam the New Jerusalem. We've gone over this.
During which they instructed the natives in the woolen manufacture of which they had begun before being ignorant. But the greater number of the exiles emigrated with their families to North America. Again, but, no, they didn't end up in anywhere else. But the greater number, the majority of these Huguenots, exiles, so-called Huguenots, emigrated with their families to North America. Here, they came here to your land, your ancestors' land. They came here, America, and swelled the numbers of the little colony already formed in Massachusetts Bay, which eventually laid the foundation of the New England states. All right, so we already got one account of them being in Massachusetts, right? So they were here from the beginning, right, with the Pilgrims and all that. On arriving in Brandenburg, the immigrants proceeded to establish their colonies throughout the electorate. Nearly every large town in Prussia had its French church and one more French pastors. The celebrated Ancillon was pastor of the Church of Berlin, and many of the Protestant gentry resorted thither, attracted by his reputation. The Huguenot immigration into Prussia consisted of soldiers, gentlemen, men of letters, and artists, traders, manufacturers, and laborers.
All right, so Prussia, because you'll get in history a lot of so-called Prussians coming in, German Prussians, and a lot of those so-called Prussians were of this ethnicity, Moorish people, Sephardic Jews, and many other people that had settled there. So we always think German, we think one way, but yeah, a lot of people, a lot of Sephardic Jews were in Prussia as well, and the Palatine area of Germany. So the Palatines carry a lot of this blood as well.
Numerous other bodies of the refugees settled in the smaller states of Germany and Denmark and Sweden and even Russia. All right, so far you're keeping track. They're all over the place, these Huguenots. All right. Others crossed the ocean and founded settlements abroad in Dutch Suriname. Where? In Dutch Suriname, America, Suriname. Dutch, they call it Dutch Suriname, the South America. At the Cape, right, that's I believe in Cape Horn in South Africa, and in the United States of America, in the colonies. All right. The settlement formed at the Cape of Good Hope was of considerable importance. It was led by a nephew of Admiral Duquesne and included members of some of the most distinguished families of France: Duplessis, de Mornay, Roubaix, de La Fontaine, de Chavannes, de Villiers, de Pré, Leroux, and Roux. All right, and it keeps going. It says, other settlements were established in the state of New York, at Albany, under their patron Van Rensselaer, and at Manhattan, where they were joined by a body of persecuted Vendus from the south of France. At New Rochelle, also in Westchester County, another settlement was formed, which long continued to flourish among the descendants of these immigrants, were the celebrated families of Jay and De Lancey, well known in the political history of the United States. All right, these people are well-known people. They're Huguenots. In Massachusetts, they formed several settlements in the celebrated Faneuil Hall at Boston. All right, if anybody's from New England or Boston, even I grew up in Boston, I know what Faneuil Hall is. There's this historic building right in the middle of downtown Boston. It's supposed to be really old from those colonial times. Like if you don't really study, you don't really pay attention to it, but it's historic.
Now, what I'm trying to say is deep because I grew up in Boston again, and I used to go to Faneuil Hall downtown, and people would probably go nuts to know or possibly even imagine that this might be a Moorish person or person of color. All right, Faneuil. This guy they named Faneuil Hall after, and most likely, I'm telling you right now, he probably was, guys, and that's just the truth. When you think of the ethnicity of these people, all right, this is a lot of years ago. Things change over time.
All right, it's one of those revolution plays, and with all these people met, and a very famous landmark. But they're letting us know that this was a Huguenot place, where the plea for national independence was so early heard was the gift of the son of a refugee. Worcester, in the same state, was originally a Huguenot colony. All right, Worcester, Massachusetts. That's a Huguenot colony. Who's these Huguenots? We're gonna get to that. In Maryland and Virginia, other settlements were formed, and from the Mauries and Fontainees of the A latter states some of the best blood of America has come. What do you mean some of the best blood of America? So like what I was saying earlier about the names changing. So Fontaines in Spain it would be like something like Fuente, de la Fuente of the Fontaines, of the Fontaine family, de la Fuente, de la Fontaines. All right. South Carolina was even styled the home of the Huguenots.
Home of the Huguenots.
Nearly 1,000 fugitives having reached it from the ports of Holland alone. There they formed three colonies at Charleston, at Santee, and Orange Quarter at the Cooper River. The first pastor of the Huguenot church at Charleston was Elias Prelew, a descendant of Antoine Preloi, Doge of Venice in 1618. From the French settlers in Carolina have come the Ravenels, Travestans, the Peronus, the Laurens, the Nevilles, the Boudinots, the Manigaults, the Marians, the Garies, the Hougars, the Gaylors, the Benorts, the Bayers, Dupreys, Chevaliers, like Chevaliers, right? And many illustrious Americans, many illustrious Americans. All right, we're gonna see how many. But Holland and England constituted the principal asylums of the exiled Huguenots. Holland in the first instance and England in the next. Many of these refugees passing from the one country into the other in the course of the great political movement which followed up close upon the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. All right, we're going to hear a lot about this Edict of Nantes if you've never heard about it. So many of these people ended up in Holland, they're telling you right now, and England. So remember that. So 200-300 years later when they come to the colonies, or even 50 years later when they come into the colonies, they're being labeled English or Dutch Holland, but they're really French Huguenots. All right, get what I'm saying? So we're gonna see a lot of this as we go. So there was also a large number of destitute landed gentry, professional men and pastors to whom the earnings of a livelihood was extremely difficult. And these also had to be relieved out of the fund. From the first report of the French Relief Committee, dated December 1687, that is, only 14 months after the revocation, appears that 15,500 refugees had been relieved in the course of the year. Of these, says Weiss, 13,050 were settled in London. All right, so all over the place. 600 of them, for whom it could not find employment in England, were sent at its cost to America. America. They were just sent to America. Sent how? Remember, they had to pay their way. They weren't just getting free rides, and the only way they were able to do that is through indentured servitude. They had to work their way 7 years most of the time, from 4 to 7 years, to gain their freedom again, and maybe possibly they can own land too and be wealthy, unless they were already coming with a deal that they would have land granted to them and their own indentured servants through some deals they made, depending on their status, right, where they were coming from.
People, we know that's far. All right, so what I want to just explain, in case I didn't explain it too much in this presentation, is the whole history. French Huguenots were, welcomed to practice their Protestantism for a while under one of the Louises, Louis the 14th, I believe, or the one before him. And then about another time, another period, another Louis comes, and this is what they're saying, the revocation. So all of a sudden, they're like, nope, you got to be Catholic, no more Protestantism. So all of a sudden, all these ex-Moors and Sephardic Jews who were secretly practicing all their, beliefs and practices and all that under the banner of being new Christians had to leave. They couldn't even be Protestants anymore because you know what? The Catholics knew. There's a reason why they went after and persecuted the Huguenots and Protestants. And I hope you guys are starting to see that. The same people being persecuted from the Iberian Peninsula, mostly. All right. So now we're going to keep going. Just wanted to go and break that down. Jews, a lot of them ended up and were very successful in their commerce and business in Holland and Dutch Republic, which also happened to be one of the places where the Huguenots were able to go after they were refugees and become very successful too. As it says here from the Brigham Young University, Le Grand Arche des Fugitives, Huguenots in the Dutch Republic after 1685 by Michael Joseph Walker from the Brigham Young University, Provo. And right here, page 14 of this book, article says resettlement in the Netherlands was somewhat more successful for the Huguenots than in the British Isles. In both locations were the most receptive as compared to anywhere else because of cultural and linguistic structures provided by the pre-existing Walloon churches. The greater number of Huguenots settled in the Dutch Republic as opposed to any other single place. In the Netherlands, the Huguenots retained their separate culture and identity for the longest time of any of the areas of resettlement, arguably into the 19th century. However, they also managed to be integrated into Dutch society. The Huguenots were attractive to the Dutch because of their skills importing in the Dutch economy. Doesn't that sound like how they were also allowing the Sephardic Jews to settle in Amsterdam and all these places because they were going to be so important to the economy as well? And also their Reformed religion, which matched so well the religion of the Dutch Reformed Church. Indeed, the Dutch communities to which the Huguenots fled greatly benefited from the additional talent, wealth, and devotion these refugees brought and generated refugees, just like Sephardic Jews. Alice Clare Carter suggests that the Dutch readily accepted and invited skilled, talented, or wealthy foreigners. She argues that while other countries were rejecting religious diversity, the Netherlands, especially Amsterdam, embraced the skilled individuals who helped create the Dutch Golden Age, regardless of religious confession. However, the religious confession of the Huguenots happened to match very closely the sentiments of the Dutch Reformed Church, making them even more attractive than other sorts of refugees. Amsterdam was a city where toleration flourished. Remember that Amsterdam, many Sephardic Jews were prospering there and had control of the commerce in Amsterdam. And also, so these Huguenots, if they wanted to do business, they had to do business with the Jews, basically their own people from ancient times in Spain and Portugal, and also provided a ready market for their Huguenot refugee industrial skills. The Huguenots enriched the communities where they made new homes. Their commitments to the new communities left a lasting cultural impact where they settled. In fact, the most skilled Huguenots migrated to the Netherlands because the Dutch Republic found quick use for their skills. Various cities even competed with each other in the Republic to attract the most skilled refugees. William III of Orange also encouraged the towns to support the Huguenots as part of his effort to gain political favor amongst Protestants around the Republic and England and to combat the policies of his political opponent Louis XIV. Furthermore, the states of Holland offered generous funds, which also served as propaganda against France and emboldened the Dutch to help Huguenot refugees. The Dutch army also benefited from the Huguenot exodus from France, as Louis XIV had previously employed Huguenots as soldiers and officers. All right, so that was just a little quick thing. Just wanted you to see that, yeah, they were also Huguenots, just like Sephardic Jews became very prosperous and were settling in Holland and becoming Dutch citizens. All right, so now we get into this journal, Huguenot Merchants in the Protestant International in the 17th Century, by J.B. Bosher, the William and Mary Quarterly, Volume 52, Number 1, from January 1995, pages 77 to 102. Again, Huguenot Merchants and the Protestant International. The Reformation of the 16th century created religious conflict in France that lasted for 2 centuries, and in some respects even longer. In the 17th century phase of this conflict, church and state made efforts to destroy the Calvinist heresy that had taken root in the kingdom. A vigorous Roman Catholic resurgence, the Counter-Reformation, gave these efforts great force. Consequently, several waves of emigration brought Huguenots to Protestant parts of Europe. The word refugee, again, the word refugee, just like the Sephardic Jews were being called refugees, was invented to describe them. Refugee was invented for the Huguenots. Some of them found their way to the English colonies of North America, particularly after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. By then, large communities of French-speaking Protestant refugees had gathered in the Dutch Republic. All right, they already were in the Dutch Republic. Why? And who was also there? Sephardic Jews, right? The Dutch. They brought prosperity during the same time. These Jews, and though the Huguenots were also going there, Huguenots possibly ex-Sephardic Jews, ex-Muslim Moors, so they're just meeting up with their ancestors, their cousins, their families that were already in Dutch there as Sephardic Jews. The first French church in London was established in 1550. The refugees who left France in the generations that settled in America were not only joining the Protestant colonies of English North America, but were also joining a cosmopolitan diaspora, a Protestant international, a diaspora, just like the Sephardic Jews and Moors, right? Merchants stand out as one of the more robust elements in the Protestant international. Merchants. Who was the merchants? Again, merchants, Protestants, Huguenots. It's the same titles. They're doing the same thing in the same places. All right, that book just told us that a lot of these Moors that were expelled from Spain and Portugal became Huguenots in France. You see how it all connects, right? Merchants stand out as one of the more robust elements in the partisan international. They freighted ships, all right? Who was also doing that? Sephardi's and Moors with goods for sale abroad, sent sons and nephews across the seas and as agents in order to extend their trading circles, just like the Sephardic Jews were doing, and corresponded with foreign trading partners. Such business practices gave them international contacts stronger than those of the soldier and artisans of the Huguenot dispersion and different from those of the intellectuals. The correspondence of refugees such as Pierre Bayle, Pierre Jury, Jean Leclerc, and Jean Theophile des Aguilers was abundant and full of ideas, a major part, indeed, of the early Enlightenment. Letters between merchants were humdrum exchanges of information about prices, commodities, and transactions, but behind them were family relationships. Family. Behind all those titles and tags was what? Family relationships, just like Sephardic research we just did about how they had their family connections all over. Same thing, the Huguenots, right? Who are these Huguenots that formed the heart of the partisan international? The overseas business of Huguenot merchants flourished in the atmosphere of personal trust based on common religion and carefully fostered relations of scattered families. Posting a relative abroad as a trading partner reduced the risk of fraud, and all merchants, Catholic and Jewish, as well as Huguenot, did so because they knew the difficulty of collecting debts. They all did so, right? But Huguenots were particularly well endowed with relatives abroad as a result of the persecution that drove them from France and from, before that, Spain and Portugal. Even after the decrees of May 18 and July 14, 1682, and several more in 1685 and 1686 made immigration a crime punishable by slavery in the galleys or even death. As persecution intensified during the 1680s, Huguenot merchants' colonies in Amsterdam, London, Rotterdam, and elsewhere grew larger than the foreign communities in French ports, and their numbers swelled dramatically after the revocation of Edict of Nantes by the addition of the merchants among the 150,000 to 200,000 new refugees. Until then, the mercantile part of the Protestant International had been largely composed of English and Dutch merchants, together with Walloons, refugees from Spanish Netherlands. These were Jews. They're talking about Jews. They ain't telling you in this article. They're calling these people hugging us, but these are all, we just read all the info, right? Who was on these areas doing the trade and doing business until then? But the late 1680s were a turning point when the French element became substantial. Huguenots took an active part in the phenomenal expansion of the Anglo-Dutch and Anglo-American trade in North Atlantic. The diaspora of Huguenot merchants has been an elusive historical subject. This is partly because the records are scattered and the merchants do not fit easily into the national history of any country. You see? See how they don't make sense? Because these are Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moors, crypto converso Moranos, Moriscos. Historians tend to classify Huguenot merchants with other immigrants, and so to miss their essentially cosmopolitan character. Much Canadian American history treats the people who reached North America as though they had turned their backs on Europe, but the Huguenot merchants at least had not. Canadian historians usually ignore the Huguenots of La Rochelle and Bordeaux, who carried on much, sometimes most of the trade with New France, presumably on the ground that they were not Canadian.
Read here. So again, remember the Huguenots had to go.
All right, so they're going all over the place, right? The Huguenots. Okay, yeah. So this is we're watching excerpts of old videos, right? But we're doing a remastered version. This is way better. There's a lot of small talk and all that in those videos, but let's get to the point. Yeah, a lot of your ancestors labeled as merchants. Yeah, you got to really look into that. It actually does. Most of them are most likely Sephardic, Jewish, Huguenot, Moorish people. A lot of those trades, were from them. All right, the merchants, they were the ones dealing with the money. All right, so before we continue, I just want to go ahead and read another book. We're gonna do it live since we're here. Just put that the music, right? Okay. So it says Huguenot heritage, the history and contribution of the Huguenots in Britain. All right. Oh wow! I clicked on it and went right where I wanted it. There we go. We'll go to chapter 2. All right, hold on. Let me 'cause I didn't name the author. Okay, some people like the sources. And this is by Robin D. Gwynn, senior lecturer in history, Massey University, New Zealand. Okay, New Zealand. So we go to chapter 2. It says the Huguenot settlements in England. It says, given the chronology of persecution in France, it is not surprising that French Protestants were to be found seeking refuge abroad from the 1520s onwards, especially in the 1560s and 1570s. Emigration diminished in the early 17th century, briefly reviving in the 1620s, but it intensified sharply from the late 1670s and peaked in the 1680s. Therefore, thereafter, it was more sporadic, intensifying anew in the late 1740s and early 1750s, then dying away altogether during the second half of the 18th century. Jean Migaud was typical of the Huguenots and fleeing his country only when faced by an emergency. Although men sometimes left ahead of or separately from their families, there was no conscious process of chain migration whereby refugees, as they settled in a new land, sponsored the migration of kinsfolk or fellow villagers from their homelands until a section of the original community had been transplanted. Nor did the countries to which the refugees fled appoint state officials to assist their passage. In contrast to the case of Salzburg in 1731, when all Protestants over the age of 12 were expelled, and Prussia, we just read about Prussia, right, promptly appointed special commissaries to organize their relief and transport. In the 16th and early 17th centuries, Huguenot refugees often hoped to return home when conditions improved. But after the Dragonnades and the revocation of the decision to emigrate was likely to be permanent, their French background could hardly have been more effective in preparing the Huguenots for a refugee environment. They had never been anything other than an exposed minority. Listen, remember who they really are, Sephardic Jews and Moors. Every official document reminded them of their isolation, since they were always referred to as belonging to the so-called Reformed religion, or RPR, religion pretendue réformée. They were used to living in fear, and their survival depended on the development of inner certainty and fortitude. We have seen that they were not a microcosm of French society as a whole, but were mostly artisans or burgesses, right? The middle class, the burgesses. They, they possessed therefore commercial and craft skills and an unusually high degree of literacy. Such assets were portable. They could readily be taken from country to country and from town to town as opportunities beckoned. Had the Huguenots been predominantly a rural, landed, or peasant group, their history in exile would have been very different. As it was, they were welcome in many parts of Europe. All right, because of their skills, remember who they are, Sephardic Jews and Moors, because of their skills and culture, their background. The Huguenots were welcome everywhere they went. As it was, they were welcome in many parts of Europe and the wider world, and for good reason. They blessed the lands that adopted them with commercial advantages, as well as with a rare combination of integrity and determination. You got to understand, they preferred this over death, right? The Catholics were after them. The Catholics were after them. Much love and respect to Frank Ritchie. Thank you for the donation. One outcome of their education, their beliefs, their commercial interests, and Calvinist international coordination was that even while in France, the Huguenots developed contact elsewhere, all right? So remember, we just read how they had the chain network of families, right? Really, it wasn't just about religion, families ties to the Iberian Peninsula, these families that have been persecuted all these years throughout Europe. They start setting up networks everywhere. Just like the Sephardic Jews and Moors, they start setting up networks everywhere. We've read all this. It's the same people, same persecution. Calvinism in Geneva, in La Rochelle, in London, in Amsterdam was interlinked. All right, all these had Huguenot people in them. This made the decision to emigrate more acceptable, the process of taking refuge that much easier, the choice of destination greater. Before the world of international Calvinism had developed, the earliest refugees slipped across the border of other French-speaking areas, notably the southern Low Countries and parts of Switzerland, huh? Flemish. Their impact on the places to which they went was considerable. Indeed, was partly responsible for the development of Calvinist internationalism. It can be encapsulated by a brief look at the fascinating history of the Reformation in another area they evangelized, the islands of Jersey and Guernsey. All right. The Channel's islands were in a very curious political and religious position in the first half of the 16th century. They were small, rather isolated, and much closer to France than England, yet still in the hands of the Tudors. After almost all the continental mainland possessions, once ruled by their predecessors, had fallen to the French king, the islands were fortified frontier posts in sight of enemy country. Their inhabitants spoke French, all right? So it almost sounds like they were moving amongst kingsmen that had already been in the Channel Islands for years, all right? The so-called Tudors. Who's the Tudors? Oh yeah, we got many references of them being so swarthy. Oh yeah. So they spoke French, these inhabitants, used livres tournois and not pounds sterling, and were subject to Norman law. But they were as anti French as they were un English, as part of their Norman heritage. Their ecclesiastical links were with Normandy rather than England. Their bishop was the Bishop of Countenance, and continued to be so throughout the Henrician and Edwardian reformations. The Catholic reaction under Mary and part of the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Protestant ideas and hostile encounter sorry countermeasures developed more swiftly in France than in England, and Normandy was affected at early stage. In 1528, laymen were burned for heresy at Rouen, and countesses, and three women at Avranches, both because of their closeness and because they spoke French, therefore had no educational opportunities in England. Channel Islanders were inevitably influenced by events in Normandy, although we cannot name French Protestant teachers active in Jersey and Guernsey before Edward VI's reign. There is good reason to believe they had been at work for years. The Channel Islanders had a long tradition of vocal and pertinacious defense of their rights, and were well aware that in the last resort it was both difficult and impolitic for the English Privy Council to insist on its own way in such a remote, foreign, and beleaguered part of the realm. At the time of the Reformation, they were protesting loudly about various political matters. Yet only one or two lone voices were raised against the Westminster Acts introducing Protestantism. Parish fraternities, obits, endowments left for masses to be said on the anniversary of a person's death, and chantry chapels abounded in the islands. But their suppression gave rise to no apparent protest, right? Protest, wayside crosses were destroyed with a will. And when in 1549 the Act of Uniformity did away with Latin services, these were at once abandoned. Indeed, the Privy Council wrote to thank the islanders for their speedy action. They can hardly have adopted Cranmer's English prayer book, which they would have found even less intelligible than Latin. The historians of Jersey, G.R. Bellin, suggest that Calvin's prayer ecclesiasticas were used instead. During Mary's reign, when an attempt was made to resume the Maundy procession of St. Helier, two youths marched in front of carrying a dead toad on a gibbet. Such an offense would surely have merited the death sentence in France, probably too in Marian England. In Jersey, all that was required of the offenders was that they find security for good behavior. Clearly, Protestantism was too strongly entrenched for more forceful action to be acceptable. The Huguenot bridgehead that had been established in the Channel Islands was of enduring value to refugees escaping France, and we will see later that the form of worship developed there over the next century exercised an important influence on the nature of later Huguenot churches in England. While the earliest French Protestants to reach England included those leaving Normandy for Jersey and Guernsey, the first major influx of refugees came not from France at all, but from the southern Low Countries. These were therefore Walloon speaking rather than French speaking Huguenots, all right? Walloons and Huguenots, same people, but they were rapidly joined by Frenchmen alongside, whom they worshipped and with whom they shared in English eyes a common identity. From the time Lutheranism first spread until just before the end of the century, the conglomerate of provinces that made up the Low Countries was ruled by only two monarchs, Charles V, right, the Catholics, right, Swarthy Charles V, yes, so-called black man, until his abdication in 1555, and Philip II, all right, his son. Both were staunch defenders of Catholicism. So this is what it really is about: war between ex-Sephardic Jewish, Moorish, Muslim people who became new Christians, Protestants. They're still the same people, right? They're still crypto secret hiding, practicing their old beliefs. They're just outwardly, we're going to read later on, outwardly Protestants, outwardly Huguenots. Huguenot means confederation of comrades, conspirators, right? Conspirators against who? The Catholics. Both were staunch defenders of Catholicism, right? Charles V, their willingness to use the Inquisition to enforce their desires ran counter to the wishes of their subjects, who held an unusually tolerant point of view. Lutheranism and Anabaptism reached the area early. When Calvinism arrived, it first took root in the great old towns of the south, and as we have seen, its development in France and Low Countries remained closely intertwined. After the English Reformation, the long-standing close trading links between England and the Low Countries, as well as the proximity of the Channel, made it inevitable that those fleeing persecution, again, persecution, people being persecuted, would head for London. A few Protestants from the area arrived even before the Henrician Reformation, following closely on the heels of the earliest Lutheran books, which are known to have reached England by 1519. It was to be another decade before the French king was calling on Henry to repatriate French heretics who had sought refuge in his realm. Persecution in the Low Countries became acute only after the ascension of Philip II. Calvinism grew rapidly in the Netherlands. In the 1560s, the large numbers of Calvinist refugees reached England in 1562 and 63 after the outbreak of religious wars in France. Many more followed in 1567 and 8. After the first revolt in the Netherlands failed, the Duke of Alva arrived there with Spanish and Italian troops and implemented policies based on fear and bloodshed. Another large influx occurred at the time of the Second Revolt in 1572 and 3. The provinces of the Low Countries under Spanish control remained unsafe for convinced Protestants, and many left during the remainder of the century, seeking sanctuary either to the north, where the Union of Utrecht eventually joined a group of provinces in a fighting alliance against Spain, or across the Channel, right, against the Catholics. It is impossible to state precisely how many religious refugees were in England at any one time. Numerous returns of aliens in the London area were compiled under Elizabeth and the early Stuarts, inspired either by the government fears about possible riots in the capital and plots against the royal person, or since aliens were heavily taxed by economic motives. The evidence seems ample, but it is difficult to interpret. Contemporaries had problems defining the word alien. Extant returns are not always concerned with the same region. It is not always clear whether the returns relate only to men or to women and children as well. Above all, it is hard to know how many of the aliens were inspired to come primarily by religious motives. For the purposes of this book, the most relevant of the early returns is that of 1573, the year after the massacre of Saint Bartholomew in France, right when they massacred the Huguenots. We're talking about the Catholics, and the outbreak of the Second Revolt in the Netherlands. Now, don't think it was one way. There was many histories where the Protestants were doing it, massacring the Catholics, and in this instance, the massacre of St. Bartholomew was the Catholics doing it to the Protestants. All right. Remember Oliver Cromwell? He was a Protestant, and he did the same to the Catholics, and he kicked them out. Right? Remember the Jacobites? Right? They were Catholics. Well, they were under the banner of Catholics. So again, he's talking about the main one we're going to talk about is the massacre of St. Bartholomew in France and the outbreak of the Second Revolt in the Netherlands. It suggests that there were 5,315 members of the various foreign churches in and about London, of whom just under a half had come for reasons of employment rather than religion. As a result of the troubles of the continent, substantial numbers of refugees came to England in 1572 and 1573. Of Southampton, where foreign church with 116 communicant members had been formed in the winter of 1568 and 8, the civic authorities now ordered references of newcomers to be listed in case spies tried to take the opportunity to enter the country. While the Rye, the major, reported to Lord Burghley that 641 refugees arrived between 27 of August, just after the massacre, and 4 of November, 1572. There is no evidence that any newcomers swelled the large stranger community at Norwich, which in 1571 already numbered nearly 4,000, or getting for a third of the city's population. Almost a half of the 4,000 were children, and about a sixth had been born in England. Nor does much smaller Dutch settlement at Maidstone seem to have been affected. On the other hand, the community of 406 foreign Protestants originally settled in Sandwich in 1561 grew greatly and was about to spawn the Canterbury settlement. It had previously been responsible for that at Colchester, where, according to a return of 1573, there were 534 foreigners. These figures show that foreign Protestant churches in England had well over 10,000 members as early as 1573, and the majority of them were religious refugees. All right, so again, remember who they applied the word refugee to. It was first applied to Huguenots. This is who they're talking about. Over the next generation, the number of aliens in the country grew substantially. All right, again, Huguenots, aka more Sephardic Jews. Let's not forget, peaking in the 1590s, both in the capital and the provinces. The Norwich community grew despite the loss of 2,480 members to a plague in 1578 and 9 and was numbered at 4,679 in 1582. Plague likewise hit Southampton with great severity in 1583 and 84, but although over 70 members of the foreign church died, there had been only 25 deaths in the previous 5 years. It still had 186 communicants in August 1584. The other congregations increased too. They were certified from Colchester in 1586 that there were 1,293 Dutch settlers, of whom 504 were children born in England. Although the community of Rye had returned to France by the 1590s, the Canterbury settlement was flourishing, and when the consistory there investigated the situation in 1597, it found the church had more than 2,000 members. There may have been as many as 3,000 a few years earlier. The total figure for all the foreign churches in the realm at the time must have exceeded 15,000. The French churches in England represented at colloquies between 1581 and 1604. Dutch churches represented, all right. So French and Dutch, so-called French, so-called Dutch, Moorish Sephardic people, heritage, right? The so-called Protestants, Protestant, being persecuted by the Catholics, all right. Now it goes on to explain who these people become. Many bankers, right? Many important people in England, very financially stable now. So I just wanted to read that. So again, you're gonna see you can pursue. This is another source if you want to read the whole thing. Pretty good book. If you're interested in the Huguenots in England, all right. We're gonna go back to the video, all right, and we're gonna continue. Oh, wow.
Wherever they said was a Protestant friendly area, many of them ended up in Ireland.
Okay. Man, I went overtime here tonight. Ooh, what? That information was thick. What did y'all think about all of that? Tell him, Queen. I said I'm gonna let Queen handle this one. You know, there ain't no such thing that if you're talking to me and either Queen of the whole damn thing or Kalani is around that you're talking out public. You ain't got no secrets with them because you could be straight up with them, or when you finish talking to me, I will be done told them. So, you know, if Queen is giving you a pat on the back about being looking forward to you doing a live performance in here, it's because ever since we started doing this, we've been talking about how we're doing this to create a platform by which we can have artists come on and perform live, you know, in place where they're at. They could come on to our studio and perform live. But I'm only saying this because, guys, this whole show with nothing to say important about what we're studying here. You know, this is another aspect of people that have come to America. You know, there were Moors and Jews, you know, more swarthy people from Southern Europe or Asia. which is what that area of the world is called, is Asia. So not everybody in America is a Native American. It's not an indigenous person, as we can see. There are large numbers of Sephardic Jews and Morisco Moors, or what they said here in today's reading, Huguenots, especially in South Carolina. And if you were here the other day, we learned that the largest plantation owner in South Carolina was in fact a Huguenot that had come over here from England as a crypto-Christian who had escaped whose ancestors had escaped the Holy Roman Crusade to take their money, take their land, take them, kill them, enslave them, whatever it was they wanted to do with them. So, I just got home, about 5:15 this evening. I'm kind of tired. So I'm just I'm not gonna play any music tonight just to make sure I don't accidentally play some music that doesn't belong to us. But I am gonna hold the video in its place, and we're gonna learn more tomorrow about the Huguenots in Ireland. Because like I've said lots of times that my grandfather was a Scottish Irish Moor, which means he probably was a Huguenot. And my grandmother, and this is on my father's side, my grandmother, she was a West Indies Indian. She always said that, and people called her Geechee and all these different other words, because when she would start speaking fast, you couldn't understand what language she was speaking. And they just applied that to her. But I'm going to be personally really interested in this Irish Huguenots, because that reflects directly to what I was taught as part of my ancestry of my grandfather with this Lias name that also has a scroll in Ireland. And boy, if ever we're talking about anything or learning anything and that pops up, I'm going to be so excited. You know what I'm saying? I will be so excited. So let me stop the education part right there and just leave us here. I don't know. I swear to God, I'm looking at the thumbs up and it's still saying 1. And I know there's at least 3 of us in here because it says 3 people are watching. That's just showing my ignorance at doing these live podcast shows, that I would bring that into the show and start talking about what is wrong with my legs. Ain't nobody liking my show. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I think I'm gonna fold it up and go home. Ain't nobody's watching my show. So I'm just whining and sniveling, y'all. Yep. All right, so thank y'all for watching. I'm going to end the screen right here, and I will see you guys again tomorrow. Hold those thoughts.